Welcome to Podcast on the Brink, your weekly dose of Indiana basketball news and discussion, brought to you by the Assembly Call and Inside the Hall. I'm your host, Jerod Morris. Join me live at assemblycall.com every Thursday night and immediately following every IU game for our live IU postgame show. And visit InsideTheHall.com for complete coverage of IU basketball and to join the discussion in the Inside the Hall Premium Forum.
Indiana basketball mini-series tickets are now available online at IUHoosiers.com. Both 5-game and 3-game packages are now available, featuring games against Louisiana Tech, South Dakota State, Arkansas, Northwestern, and Ohio State. Come check out your Indiana Hoosiers for these games over break inside beautiful Simon Scott Assembly Hall. You can visit IUHoosiers.com for more information. Go IU!
Alex, the Hoosiers are 3-0. Another game against a sub-250 opponent coming up on Saturday night. Thought it would be a good time to open up the mailbag, get some questions. It's kind of one of those tricky spots right now where we do have 3 games. So we've got 120 minutes of play and data to kind of look at and assess. But it's always a little tricky with this level of competition, because Indiana hasn't played a team above 250 in KenPom, so you don't want to draw too many conclusions, and yet you don't want to totally overlook some of the things and some of the trends that you've seen for 3 games. So we will try to keep that in mind, kind of keep that balanced mindset as we go through here and assess what we've seen so far.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things where on 5 takeaways, I'm trying not to make too much out of each takeaway every game because you have to keep in context the opponent. But as we'll get into, I think there's been some good things, and there's also been some areas for concern. The good news is, I guess, if you're kind of bored by this early season schedule, at least after Troy, the next 3 games I think should be a little bit more competitive, and then we kind of get into December, which is going to be unlike most Decembers that we've seen, I think, in recent memory, and that IU's not really, other than Nebraska, which is actually a conference game, so I guess it counts as quote unquote should be competitive, but every game in the month of December should be one to look forward to, and kind of going back before they started the early season Big Ten games, it would often be 2 or 3 towards the end of the month games in December that you would kind of circle as wins, and this year Indiana's not going to have that luxury. So
yeah, where are the Christmas cupcakes? Just no Christmas cupcakes this year.
I was looking at the mini-series packages that IU has. It's actually, I don't think it's great for the having an active student section for some of the. I think there's 2 Big Ten home games that are going to be on that mini-series. So hopefully the people that buy those tickets show up and are allowed and as obnoxious as possible for Big Ten play.
That's right. That is right. All right. We got a couple of audio questions, so we'll hit those first, and then we got a bunch of other questions from the forum. So let's answer these. Here we go. First question.
Hi, this is Tom Jameson from the Premium Forum. First of all, Jerod and Alex, I want to thank you for this mailbag edition of the podcast. I really enjoy it. My question is about the defense. I am a firm believer that Archie will get this defense to at least top 25 level, at least. But I really thought that they would start out better than what it has already. Even with the addition, with 3 new additions, 4 if you count Jerome, I guess, to the team, I thought it would be better. Anyway, what are both of yours take on the defense thus far? Your opinions on it, what's wrong and what it needs to do. Again, I want to emphasize I'm not worried about it getting better. I'm just surprised it didn't start out better than it did. Thanks again, guys.
We've talked about this a lot on the post-game show. We spent the majority of Assembly Call Radio Thursday night talking about this, Alex. And I think what Tom did right there is he hit the appropriate balance where it seems fair to be concerned about what we've seen, but not necessarily sound alarm bells that there's some massive issue for the future. But I think it is fair to be a little bit concerned, and the coach has expressed plenty of concern himself. So where do you stand right now on the defense, the issues that it's faced, and your level of concern?
Yeah, I try to kind of just look at the points per possession allowed in every game, and I think only once have they allowed more than one, but that was one more time than that happened in the first 6 games last year. So you kind of look at that and you say it's maybe a little bit or potentially a lot behind where it was last season. But you look at Archie's first year, they had a couple games early on where they just kind of got smoked on that end of the court and got better as it went along. So there's examples of a rough start in Archie's tenure and things getting better. The thing I'll say, and Jerod, I'm sure you have thoughts on this. I haven't had a chance to listen to Assembly Call Radio from last night, so my apologies if I repeat anything that you guys said. But and Archie has kind of alluded to this. But the thing I see, and when I watch these games, particularly early in the season, I'm not necessarily watching the ball at all times. I'm kind of trying to watch things away from the ball as well, just to kind of see with guys like Demezi and Jerome, like their positioning and kind of their awareness and things like that. So far, I see with some of the new guys not necessarily knowing where they're supposed to be on rotations, and Ryan kind of hit on that. Carrazza hit on that in film session. There was a play in the last game where basically 2 guys tried to rotate to the same player, and it left the guy on the right side open and for a wide open shot. You can't have that once you get into play against better teams. It works. It's fine against North Alabama. It's a teaching moment. But that's the kind of stuff that will drive a coach crazy, because I'm sure they're spending, I don't know, I don't want to put a percentage on it because I'm not in practice, but I'm going to guess that they're spending more time right now on defense than they are offense in practice. And so when you kind of go over things over and over and you still have a screw up like that, it's going to annoy a coach like Archie, who is very detailed and wants things to happen the way he wants them to happen. Otherwise, he's not going to put up with it. The other thing I'll say is it's too comfortable right now for other teams to do things with the ball, right? I mean, when you've got a team like Portland State scoring, I think it was 1.08 points per possession, I mean, that tells me that Indiana is just not making things difficult enough. Guys can kind of get the ball where they want it to go. They can dribble into the lane. I mean, there's been countless examples of guys getting beat on the perimeter, and that's when the breakdowns happen. It's not. I'm not blaming specific guys on the perimeter, but it's more of a, we know that the pack line is a very team oriented concept, and you got to have 5 guys out there that are connected and on the same page. And when you have somebody get beat kind of on your first line of defense there, it kind of breaks everything down. So right now, I just don't see Indiana making things difficult enough on the opponents, and they got to get that fixed. I mean, there's less than 3 weeks to go before Florida State comes to town, and you make those mistakes consistently against a good team, and you're going to get beat. I mean, Archie's kind of alluded to that. In his opening statement in his press conference the other night, he said, kind of, we can't get stops, and if we don't get this fixed soon, we're going to experience some tough moments in games. That's basically him saying, we're going to get beat if we don't fix this stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, even within the game, you could tell he wasn't having it. I mean, the tie got ripped off. He's chewing out the team. Clearly, they came and played with a greater sense of purpose on the defensive end in the second half. But I think you hit on it. I mean, Indiana needs a lot of help, and the help hasn't been great. That combination is not good from a defensive perspective. The numbers, when you look at Indiana's ability to guard the pick and roll, the ability to contain dribblers, it's not there right now for the perimeter guys. I think part of that is obviously, Rob Finney hasn't been able to play a full complement of minutes and hasn't been fully healthy yet. And I think Devonte Green is really going to help that when he gets back, because for all of his weaknesses on defense, he is good, out there on the perimeter, kind of one-on-one, containing a dribbler, and forcing turnovers. And so I think that's going to help Al Durham get back to playing in a position where he's a little bit more comfortable. And, I think the other thing people have pointed out is, well, maybe some of the defensive numbers are a little bit noisy because guys are hitting tough shots and they're banking in shots. And yeah, there's been some of that, a little bit. But I tend to think it's more what you alluded to, that guys are just comfortable. And when you're comfortable, you make tough shots. You're more likely to make a tough shot and start feeling it and get confidence. And Indiana just hasn't done that. And I think the young guys, to your point, Trace Jackson Davis, a lot of times it feels like he's thinking a lot. And you can almost watch him like think and then move. When he is being instinctive, like providing help, from the weak side on a drive and blocking a shot, and he just goes, you can see the defensive potential there. So I think some of the frustration from fans, and I get it, is we talked a lot this offseason about, hey, third year in the pack line. This is when things are supposed to get better. And so we all thought it would be better starting out this season. And it should be, even when you kind of bake in all of the explanations and the reasons, for why it's not. But, you haven't, two of your seniors, Devonte Green and Deron Davis, who have a lot of experience in it. Devonte hasn't played at all, and Deron hasn't played much. Obviously you've got Al and Justin, and they've been out there a lot. And otherwise, you're working in a lot of new guys, Jerome and Race and Trace and Armand and Joey. Like, these guys are all, Demizi for to a certain extent. They're all doing it, so, a lot of it live game reps for the first time. So I think it's totally fair to be concerned. I'm concerned about the defense, but I also think there's a lot of reason to think that there's room to grow for this defense as you get guys back, get lineups that are more well-suited for this roster and to play better defense and just get more experience in it. But Archie's right. If it doesn't get better, this team is going to be in trouble fast because it's absolutely not up to par yet. But you look at last year, this team, to a certain extent, kind of peaked defensively early. I mean, that Marquette performance and the performance against Montana State defensively were two of their best defensive performances of the year. They were outstanding. And then, they had some good defensive performances later, obviously, but they also struggled at times. So, I mean, you can start out well, and then sometimes it doesn't carry over for whatever reason. This team's got to build some good momentum. They got to build some better habits. Hopefully it starts on Saturday night because they just don't have a lot of margin for error once December hits.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll say is Archie would never admit this, and neither would the players, but there's something to kind of your intensity level in a game against, there's a difference between playing Florida State and Portland State and Western Illinois. So I think the part of kind of what I'm most interested to see when the schedule picks up is kind of how this team rises to the occasion against playing against better teams. It's hard for any team, and we saw this last week this past Tuesday with Kentucky. It's hard to get up for every one of these non-conference games against the lower rungs of college basketball. You're going to have moments in every game where you play well, but you're going to also have moments when you struggle. And I think it's easier to stay engaged for a full 40 minutes against a really good team than it is against Portland State. Is there anything? Do you disagree? Do you agree with that?
I don't fully buy that. Here, I think that would be valid to say for a Tom Crean team because its identity was offense. The reason I don't buy that as much for Archie Miller is he wants to build the team's identity defensively. And so I think if you're going to hang your hat on defense and your identity is defense, you should play with a purpose and intensity about you and a connectedness on defense, even in these lower rung games. That's why I'm a little bit more concerned about it, just because, this is supposed to be the focus, and to see it wane a little bit like this, that's why I do understand your point, but I don't fully buy it for a program that wants its identity to be defense.
Yeah, but the guys that you talked about, there's 5 or 6 guys that are brand new. That's not ingrained in those guys yet, right? That has to be.
That's why I'm not overly. That's why I'm not overly concerned about it. There's a lot of nuance here. Like it's one of those things. Like, but I'm not huge on using that particular excuse for this team, this program. It's the third year. Like, right. And Archie himself says this program's going to hang its hat on defense. I just think we should hold him to the standard that he has stated. So I don't want to give too much ground on that. It's
fair. I mean, I don't think it's all of that. I don't think that's the sole reason. It's the reason, some of the stuff that I talked about earlier, but I mean, the lack of, I know you kind of got to create your own energy too when you start a game, but it just hasn't been an atmosphere. There hasn't been much of an atmosphere so far to somebody hall. I've been at everything. So I guess I'm curious to kind of see how they respond against better competition is kind of my overriding point. Because I think that has something to do with it. I'm not saying it has everything to do with it, but as a player, there has to be something mentally. It's not as, to me, it can't be as easy getting up for these kind of ho-hum opponents as it is to get up for a Big Ten game. So
I think the right answer to this question is like this muddy middle. Like I don't think any of the extremes are right here. I think there's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of reasons contributing to it, and there are, even with all that baked in, there's some reasons for concern. So now let's just see how these next few games play out, and I think we'll learn a little bit more.
I think we'll learn a lot about it as soon as the Louisiana Tech game. I mean, they're a top 100 team, so we'll learn something, I think, there. And if that game doesn't go well, then I think there's probably a bigger discussion to kind of unpack and wonder how this team's going to fare in December. Because the other thing, and I think we'll get into this a little bit more, is kind of you look around the Big Ten and some of the earlier results. I know they did better in the Gavitt games, but they're putting a lot of pressure on this December non-conference games. These 4 games, they really have to perform well because right now it doesn't look like the Big Ten is going to be the juggernaut that it was a season ago.
No.
So.
All right, we got one more audio question, so let's hit that one next.
Hey, Jerod. Hey, Alex. This is Scott Benson. My friends call me Quinn, so you guys can call me Quinn. Hey, just had a quick question for you. Holidays are coming up, got some Christmas shopping to do, and I'm just wondering if you guys have a recommendation for IU apparel, maybe a website or a shop or something. Really want to get my little ones and my wife some good IU gear. So yeah, just looking for a recommendation. Thought maybe you guys could talk about that on the mailbag. So would really appreciate that if you could do that. And also, Alex, Nate Reavers, you're overrating him. All right, I'll hang up and listen. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Really, really good question there. I think that Scott sent in. Alex, do you have any recommendations for him for an apparel shop to get some good IU gear?
First of all, embrace the Nate Reavers breakout season. Just accept it. Know that it's coming. And 2,
I will not.
I think Home Field has not only IU apparel, but they also have apparel for the Evansville Purple Aces, who I believe had a huge win earlier this week in Rupp Arena. Is that right, Jerod?
That is right. So if it's been too long since Indiana's last big victory and you want to celebrate with Evansville, because they knocked off Kentucky, yes, go get your Purple Aces gear. Go get your Indiana gear. Yeah, look, obviously that was a setup for our sponsor, Home Field. HomeFieldApparel.com is the website. The promo code Brink is going to get you 20% off there. And if you haven't been to their site recently, you really need to go. They've got the Bison logo sweatshirt that we talked about a lot last year that seemingly everybody has. So you definitely want to get that. You can also get that design as a T-shirt, by the way. But they've got a lot of other cool basketball designs. And with the football team doing really well, they've actually released a new football-inspired shirt every single week. So, they've added 60-plus different schools, but Indiana's their flagship school. They've got more designs, more items for Indiana than they do anywhere else. So, Scott, or Quinn, I guess we can call you Quinn, you and any other IU fan out there, for yourself, for someone that you need gifts for, go to homefieldapparel.com. Just so many the thing I like about them is they've kind of pulled these cool, unique logos, out of the dustbin of history and have brought them back. And some of them are great logos. So it's cool. They're great conversation starters. I have Indiana fans all the time that I see here in Dallas stop me, when they see me wearing the sweatshirt and ask about it. So lots of really cool stuff there. Go to homefieldapparel.com, use the promo code BRINK, and you will get 20% off your entire order. All right, let's roll through some of these other questions that were submitted in the premium forum, Alex, which people can learn more about. Forum.insidethehall.com, right, is the URL for that, if people want to learn more about the premium forum.
That's absolutely correct.
Okay, let's go to Lee Can's question. Do you foresee an issue with Devonte coming back after not playing with the new folks for some time? Will he and the team have an adjustment or learning curve to deal with, or do you think that will be seamless? And then if so, with the adjustment, we would definitely want to see him back before Florida State, right? Are you hearing anything about his return? I mean, take the last part of that question. We want to get Devonte back as quickly as possible because there's always some sort of adjustment when you're working a new player in. And clearly Archie's been trying different lineups and, trying to find that chemistry and the cohesion and which lineups are going to work best. So as quickly as possible, you want to get Devonte back for that reason and so that he gets his own rhythm back, before a big game like Florida State. So I think that part of it is pretty easy to answer. What about the first part of that question? Do you foresee an issue with him coming back, and how much of an adjustment or learning curve do you think it'll be working him back into the lineup?
I don't necessarily think it's going to be there's going to be any issue with with Devonte himself coming back, maybe some other guys getting used to playing with him that haven't done it before. But at the same time, you have to remember these guys have spent a summer together playing pickup. They've worked out together all summer. They've been together. They have developed some chemistry. It's not the same as in-game chemistry. It's not the same as, going into a game and with a game plan and having Devonte be a part of it because they haven't experienced that. But I think he's a guy that you can. There's going to be, I think, some type of adjustment period. I don't necessarily think he's a guy you want to just throw back in there for the first time against Florida State. I think Indiana wants to get, like you mentioned, get him back as soon as possible. And to me, kind of reading between the lines of what Archie said after the last game, he used the words near future, hopefully getting him back in the near future. To me, that makes it sound like it's possible that Devonte could be back sooner rather than later. I think we'll get an update, obviously, before the Troy game, which happens Saturday night at 8 o'clock. Not necessarily expecting to see him on Saturday night, but I don't think it's out of the realm of possibilities that he could be back as early as next week. So,
if I had to bet on it, I would say his first game is the Louisiana Tech game. Because, what Archie has said is that he's going to have to practice. First, he's got to get cleared to practice. Then you want to get him in practice and, for about a week and then let him play. So it will be interesting to hear the update. Maybe he started practicing already. I don't know that. But you've got Troy on Saturday, then Princeton on Wednesday. Princeton is, they're ranked 223rd in KenPom right now. So they're actually kind of trending down toward, the level of these first four games rather than up toward the level of a Louisiana Tech. So you might look at that and say, okay, we can probably beat them without Devonte, so let's let him practice, get back, and then get him for Louisiana Tech. So to me, that probably makes the most sense, but I'll take him back as soon as possible because to me, watching these first three games, and we spent a lot of time in the offseason. I spent a lot of time in the offseason talking about how important I thought Devonte was to this team, and that's not a unique opinion. I think we all understood that. But he just brings some things that no one else on this roster does. And or maybe only one or two other people do. And it's really been highlighted for me these first three games. I don't think those teams have been good enough to take advantage of it, but I think Indiana really needs him back for these December games. I mean, they need a guy who can go get a shot at the end of the shot clock. They need a guy who can be an isolation scorer. He's that guy. They don't really have another one. Outside of maybe Jerome, he might be able to grow into that. And they need another guy on the perimeter with his skills who can force turnovers, contain dribblers, and do some of those things. So, he's got some weaknesses and he's, got some things that he takes off the table, but he puts things on the table in a way that not a lot of other guys do, and that I think better teams are going to be able to punish Indiana for not having if he's not out there. So to me, his importance has been accentuated through these first few games.
Do you think, Jerod, that Indiana goes back to the 3-guard lineup once Devonte is able to play with Al, Finney, and him as kind of the three starters in the backcourt?
I don't see how you wouldn't, because Al has scored well enough that you need his scoring and his shooting on the court. Having Rob, Devonte, and Al gives you three shooters, so that spaces the floor. And while Al has really struggled defensively, I think he's going to do much better when you slide him down into that, kind of three-man slot. And he's maybe not as much defending the guy with the ball, but can be a little bit more of a denial defender and do some of that, which I think he's better at. So, and, I think Archie trusts him too. To me, he's probably going to want to play those three guards as much as possible, especially in December, in these really important games. And I think Al's earned that, because as much as he struggled defensively, I've been really impressed with his offensive mindset. He's been a guy who's been really up and down offensively through his career, and he's really been consistent and been a guy looking for a shot and been a guy that his teammates can count on. And, for a team that has been really good offensively, but I think is going to struggle at times against better teams, I just think it's going to be hard for Archie to keep Al off the floor without a whole lot of shooting, on the bench to bring in behind him. I mean, do you? I don't really see a scenario where it doesn't.
The interesting thing about this whole discussion is in the offseason we talk so much about these old school Big Ten two big lineups, and based on what I've seen so far, I think it's a no-brainer that once Finney and Green are completely healthy, I think it's a no-brainer that you go back to the kind of the 3-guard set. What will be interesting is what happens with the other two spots, because you've got Justin Smith, Trace, and Brunk have all started 3 games, and to me, I don't think Justin Smith's coming off the bench based on what I've seen so far. So it's gonna. I think ultimately, and this is going to be kind of interesting to me to watch play out. I think you're going to see the 3 guards, and I think you're going to see Justin Smith and Trace against a lot of teams. I just don't think. I mean, Trace has been one of IU's 2 or 3 best players so far. Justin Smith has been one of their 2 or 3 best players so far. Al Durham has, and I don't think Finney or Green are guys that you keep off the floor either. So it's interesting just to kind of watch how this all is going to fold out or unfold, and I think maybe we're going to look back on all that talk about the big lineups in the offseason. We might see that on occasion, but I don't necessarily think that's going to be the norm for this team.
No, it's going to be more matchup dependent, and it's probably something that's more going to come in Big Ten play than what we're going to. Let's see. I mean, Florida State is a big, tall, long team. How does Archie choose to play that? But certainly, based on what we've seen, I agree with you, and that doesn't even account for Jerome. You could argue that Jerome would slot really nicely in there in that 3 slot, and then you bring Al off the bench. I don't think they want to put that pressure on Jerome. I don't think they want him playing that many minutes, and I think his offensive firepower this year profiles really well as a guy off the bench to give you a spark. So I'm not saying I would do that, but you could make that argument based on what you've seen more so than putting in one of the bigs, or playing both of those guys. So. All right, let's go to the next question here. Okay, from Madros. Ken Pom currently ranks our offense 24 spots ahead of our defense, 27 to 51 respectively. Are you buying our efficiency on offense as a strength that will continue throughout the season, or are you selling high?
Selling high, I think. I think the defense is going to end up clearly the better unit of the 2 when it's all said and done. You have to remember, too, when you're looking at the Ken Pom numbers this early in the season, there's a lot of last year thrown in there still. But I think one thing that could be bringing down Indiana's defensive number right now is just how poorly they've played defensively against 3 pretty mediocre teams. And so that's definitely, I don't know necessarily I'd have to go back and look where they were in the preseason on Pomeroy's defensive rating, but my guess is they've dropped.
In the 30s.
Yeah, so they're down to 51.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I think it's going to kind of, I don't want to necessarily think it's going to be flip-flopped, but I think the defense will end up kind of the better of the 2 units when it's all said and done. If it's not, I don't know what to think about this team because I still have a lot of questions about how they're going to score against really good defensive teams. I think they have a variety of guys that can get you 10 or 12, but I don't know that other than Devonte, I don't know that they have anybody that can take over a game. So if there's, you go up against the upper echelon teams in the Big Ten that are going to have Indiana well scouted, I'm curious to kind of see how they're going to generate some points. If they can't get stops reliably, I don't see this team kind of reaching its full potential. So I think if you're an IU fan right now, that number is something you're watching on a game-to-game basis. How are they improving, getting better defensively? Because ultimately, I think Archie said if this team wants to get where he thinks it can eventually, it's going to be based on the defense.
There are a few things on the offense that I'm buying. Indiana's shooting 34.8% from three-point range, which is obviously a market improvement from last year. I think that number will sustain, and that's the 118th best in the country. It's kind of where I thought they would be. I thought they would be a good three-point shooting team this year. Not great, and the volume's not high. They're 329th in terms of volume, but I thought they would be more efficient. I think that'll sustain. I think getting to the free throw line, I don't think they're going to get to the free throw, have a free throw rate of 58.5%. That's going to come down. But I do think that will be a theme, and I'm very encouraged by the free throw shooting that we've seen. So there are some things that I think we can look at and say, okay, this is what the coach wants to be the identity. We've got the personnel to do it. But look at where a lot of Indiana's offense has come. They've gotten a lot of transition buckets, and I think they want to get that, but better transition defenses are going to take some of that away. They've gotten a lot of second chance points, and I think they want to do that, and I think they'll be a good offensive rebounding team, but they're surely not going to be as prolific against better rebounding teams. And the biggest thing for me, Alex, that really jumps out is Indiana has only been put in isolation situations 2% of the time so far this year, according to Synergy. Good defenses try to put you in isolation situations. It's what Texas Tech does. It's what, Virginia to a certain extent does. It's definitely what Michigan did last year. Like, really good defenses do that. And Indiana hasn't been exposed because they haven't been put in those situations. That's going to happen more against better defenses. And I really struggle to see how Indiana is going to succeed in those spots. Devonte will help. Jerome I think is going to help with some of that. But I think that's where Indiana could struggle. So I buy into some of it. But it's also important to remember that Indiana has faced the 348th, 319th, and 242nd ranked defense. And yes, those adjusted efficiency metrics adjust for the competition level. But, there have also just been some types of possessions the other defenses can't put Indiana in to really accentuate the weaknesses. And that's coming. So we're going to have to see how Indiana adjusts to it.
Yeah, I mean, against good teams, Justin Smith's not going to have 2 or 3 steals a game and go dunk the ball easily on the other end of the court. I mean, he may have one of those every game or every couple games, but that's just not going to happen with any regularity. He's not going to just be able to take the ball regularly and kind of go into the traffic and just dunk on people. That's not going to happen against this. So there's been a lot of kind of, we've seen certain things that guys have done so far that I just don't necessarily think are sustainable. I don't even think that I don't know if you mentioned this, but shooting 60% on twos right now, there's no way that's not going to continue against kind of the upper echelon of the Big Ten. That's coming down for sure. So I think the key to me is, can they, they're not going to keep, like you said, the free throw rate of 58.5. Can they keep that, upper third, upper fourth of the Big Ten? And then when they get there, can they continue to convert at a reasonable rate? Because I think that's, the free throw percentage, obviously you can't control, but if you can get there, I think consistently at a good rate, I think that is a really good way to generate offense. So I'm interested to see how that continues to grow as the season goes along.
I'd say, one thing I am buying Rob Finnessy's growth offensively. He's using 30% of possessions right now. That won't keep up, but his assist rate is way up. He has somewhat improved his 2-point percentage off of its dismal, percentage from last year. He's shooting okay. And Al Durham is a guy whose offense I'm really buying into. He's not using that many possessions, but is being, and look, his effective field goal percentage isn't going to stay at 80%, of course. But I am buying that I think there are some things that he's improved on in terms of, shooting on the move, coming off screens, being aggressive, driving downhill. That I kind of thought he would, freed a little bit without Romeo in there, swallowing up all of those opportunities. I've been encouraged there. So there's some stuff I'm buying, but we've got to see. This offense is going to hit the skids at certain times, and we got to see how they deal with that. But I agree. If I was a betting man, I would bet that the defense finishes higher than the offense. And if it doesn't, I actually think that's a pretty bad sign for how the season went. Because, again, this is a program that's building its identity on defense. So I think that's where it's got to be. Let's see. Also from Medros, 3 games in, what is one positive development that has surprised you about this Indiana team, and what's one specific way in which you've been disappointed by their performance thus far?
Well, the positive, I would say, and it hasn't necessarily surprised me, but I'm just I'm happy to see it for the individual is how Jerome Hunter's looked so far. I had really no expectations for him going into the season. I just wanted to see him as somebody that I watched going back to high school, and I don't know him on a personal level, but I know some of the people around him and kind of what he's gone through is a very difficult situation. So I think that's one positive thing that I think everyone can feel good about and hope that it continues. And then, I don't want to beat a dead horse here. The disappointing thing so far, I think, is kind of what we talked about to open the show for the first 10 to 12 minutes is the defense so far. Just hasn't been on the level that I think most people expected. So we're going to learn, I think, a lot more about that coming up soon. So I don't want to kind of get into that discussion again. But to me, I think the one positive that I've kind of taken so far. And it's not necessarily a surprise, but it's just something that you look at on a human level and say, you're happy for this person that they're able to get back out there doing what they love. Jerome Hunter, to me, is at the top of the list.
What's positively surprised me, not in terms of something that I didn't think would happen all offseason, but just based on what Archie said about Rob's injury before the first game and when he missed the exhibition game, I've been pleasantly surprised by how many minutes Rob has played and how good he's looked. Because it really sounded like there was a chance that Rob wasn't going to play for a while, and it was going to take him a long time to get back. And he's not fully back, but he's been better and more effective than I was thinking he would be, based on what Archie had said. And Trace has been more impactful than he's better than I thought he was. And I didn't see him play a lot in high school, but he's just, that guy just oozes talent and ability. And look, life's going to get tougher for him when the competition goes up and he's dominating guys who aren't as athletic and aren't as big. I get all of that. But some of the instincts he shows, on defense, like I mentioned earlier, when he's just reacting and not thinking, his ability to knock down free throws so far, which I don't know if that'll sustain at 80%, but it's been nice to see. And just the competitiveness that he shows at certain times and his rebounding, I've been impressed with him. And I think is going to have a bigger impact than I was anticipating coming into the year.
Are you concerned that it has looked like so far that he's head and shoulders ahead of Joey Brunk and Deron Davis? Is that because I think a lot of people maybe came into the season having higher hopes for Brunk and Davis, and I don't want to make any judgments on either guy through 3 games, but to me so far, and again, this is a limited set of data that we have to look at, but to me, Trace looks completely on a different level from those other 2 guys.
He has. It doesn't surprise me with Brunk. Brunk is who I thought he was. He's, and maybe some people are disappointed with his impact, but I think he's mostly been what I thought. He struggles as a defender, in certain spots, but he's here for toughness. He's here for leadership, and I think he's brought some of those things. He's been a decent rebounder, but I just think Trace is a more talented and athletic guy than him. Deron, he has been disappointing because, he's not playing many minutes, and at times he's looked like the North Alabama game was weird. Like his first run in there, he looked almost totally checked out to me. And then he got back in there, had that beautiful spin move, kind of got into it with the other North Alabama guy, and that kind of got him into it. And he'll have one defensive possession where he looks totally lost, and then another one where he's out helping on a ball screen and guards a guy for a couple dribbles and recovers back and looks great. So I don't know what to think about Deron, but the way that I've kind of committed to looking at his November is I'm just not going to get that concerned about how he does in these cupcake games, because Deron to me is a guy that has really stepped up in big moments in the past. You talk about guys who maybe struggle to get up for games like this. A senior like him, I could see him kind of struggling to get up for these games, especially when his role right now is kind of limited. And I think his minutes are going to ebb and flow, but I think there's going to be 4, 5, 6 Big Ten games where he plays 12, 15 hugely impactful minutes, especially when the offense is struggling, and really helps this team win, especially on the road. I think that game against Wisconsin in December, I think Deron's going to have a big game there because I think he's going to be needed because he's got experience and he's a guy that has produced in big minutes that you can count on. So I'm a little bit disappointed because I wanted to see more from him, but I'm just not going to judge it until we start seeing big games and he's disappearing or shrinking from the moment. That's how I guess that's how I'm saying it.
I just marked that tape right there, and I'm sending it to Nate Reavers. So we'll see. We'll see what happens early December. I'm just kidding. This is going to be a theme all season long because I've now been publicly called out by you, Brendan Quinn, and
inside the coal, baby.
Inside the coal, baby.
You're not doing anything. You're not doing anything to tamp it down.
No, but I had to come back at you for your tweet after the McNeese State game. But,
your patience was rewarded.
Yeah, I agree with you on Deron, and you're never going to get. This is kind of another thing I'm thinking about. Do you after the? I don't even want to get into the whole load management thing because that was just so. I found the whole thing funny. To be honest,
load management.
Yeah, the whole idea of it. It's just like 2 completely different situations, like the NBA and college basketball. Like the term is not, it's apples to oranges. But
yes,
Do you think there's anything to like just kind of wanting to get Duran through these early games and keeping him healthy while kind of not overdoing things? Is that?
I hope so.
I know that. Okay.
I think it would be coaching malpractice if it wasn't. I mean, and that's kind of what I felt was going to be the way that it would go all in the offseason too. So.
I kind of think that's what that young man that asked that question, I think that's kind of what he was trying to say.
Yeah.
But when he correlated it to load management, when it's like load management is guys like completely sitting out when they're healthy. This is more of like, we know what this guy can do. He's been hurt in the past. We want to kind of bring him along slowly rather than throwing him out there for 20 or 25 minutes.
Yeah, we need Duran for the games we need him. Like, Duran's availability and non-availability cost Indiana an NCAA tournament spot last year. I mean, a lot of those games we lost is when he couldn't play. Like, he is an impactful player that really impacts Indiana's offense, and he doesn't really take that much off the table defensively because he does struggle in certain areas, but he also gives you some rim protection, and he's a smart, powerful defender down low. So, I mean, he does things that you're going to need in Big Ten play. And so I'm waiting for that because I think we're going to need him, and I think he's going to be the difference between winning and losing some important games. And so I hope he's healthy for those games.
For sure, yeah.
Okay. We got to that question. Are there any more questions about the team this year? Okay, let's go to Cincy Hoosier. There's only so much you can learn from the first 3 games and presumably through the rest of the November schedule, but based on IU's play to date combined with other Big Ten results, have your opinions changed related to Big Ten projections and NCAA tournament potential?
No, not too much. I think just in general, the league, I'm really not convinced that this is going to be more than a 6 or 7 bid league. So, and I picked Indiana to finish 9th in the preseason. So, for all of our sakes, I hope that's wrong because I think they're going to have to get into that top half to make the tournament because, the problem with, the league, when I look at it right now is you've got 2 teams at the bottom, I think, that are just going to be really bad in Northwestern and Nebraska. And Indiana plays those teams 3 times. Minnesota, I'm not high on them either. They're 1 and 2 so far. Rutgers, I don't know how to feel about them. They're 3-0, but they haven't played anybody. Iowa was completely embarrassed at home by DePaul. So you're talking about 5 teams right there that I have pretty significant question marks about. The thing I wonder from an IU perspective is there going to be enough combined with the non-conference schedule? Is there going to be enough opportunities for them to get the wins that bolster the resume in league play as it was last year? Because last year they were 1 game away from making it, and they lost 15 games. 15 is that right? 15 after the Big Ten tournament, they had 15 losses.
Yeah.
There's not a scenario this year where I can look at it and say if Indiana has 15 losses after the Big Ten tournament, they're even going to be in contention to make the tournament. That's the funny thing to me about watching fans of any school root against like other Big Ten teams in non-conference play. It's like you want these teams to win. Like Purdue losing at home to Texas and losing on the road to Marquette, as fun as it might be to type a snide comment on Twitter or, go to your friend's Facebook page as a Purdue fan and say something in the comments. That's not a good thing for Indiana. That if Indiana beats Purdue this season, that has a chance to be a good win.
Indiana beats Purdue this season. It's
dampened by the fact that they have already lost a couple of games in non-conference. It could lose a lot more. So you cheer for the Big Ten until you cheer for the other teams until you get into league play because you want these wins to mean something. It's not good for Indiana that Nebraska can't beat anybody, and they play Nebraska twice. What are those wins going to mean for Indiana's resume if Nebraska's just a horrible team? Nothing. So,
I agree. You hold your nose and cheer for Purdue, but if Purdue does lose and you want to go on Twitter and make a boiler fail joke, you go do it. If they've already lost the game. But I agree with you. I am watching that game and I'm like, dang it, just come back and get the stupid win, Purdue. Because it does help Indiana. So your point is well taken.
Right. So, yeah, I just don't think, from what I've seen so far, the Big Ten's is nowhere near the league that it was last year. Where are they at right now? They're fourth in the conference standings in Ken Palm. It's early, but Big 12's way out in front, then the Big East, then the ACC, then the Big Ten, and then they're not that far ahead of the SEC. So I don't think you want to be the fifth best conference in the country.
No.
You're not going to get more than 6 bids in that scenario.
No. Yeah, nothing has really changed. I guess all the Big Ten teams are about what I thought. Ohio State might be a little better than I thought and might be a worthy adversary for Michigan State, and Michigan may be better than I thought. Again, it's early, but I expected them to maybe have a little rockier transition with the new coaching staff and the new style, and they've been okay. They beat Creighton. So those are two teams that I didn't really know.
Penn State's had a nice start. They
have had a nice start. They have had a nice start.
Beat down Georgetown. Illinois is
they're worse. They're worse than I thought, or they've been worse than I thought.
But neither of us bought them particularly in the offseason, right? Even as much as we love John Gassaway, we kind of, I think both of us had our doubts. And
no, I was definitely down on Illinois. Yeah, for sure. I didn't think they'd be quite this bad. I thought they'd be a little better than they've been, but yeah, they haven't been that good. Major says, I want to go to the Forum Tipoff Classic, but can't be there all day. Besides the nightcap with Leal and Galloway, what matchups do you think will be most relevant to the Indiana program? I don't have that in front of me, so I don't know those matchups. Do you know?
I do have it in front of me. If you can't go all day, if you can show up at least by 3 o'clock or so, then you can see Gary Westside with Jalen Washington, who's
is South Bend Riley in that with Blake Wesley? He goes to Riley, doesn't he?
Yeah, they're not in it. The marquee games of the day, obviously. You have Gary Westside playing Hamilton Southeastern. You've got Carmel and Evansville Rights, which is a chance to watch Christian Lander. Then you got Silver Creek and Fort Wayne Blackhawk, which will pit Trey Kaufman against Caleb First. And then
that's a fun one.
The nightcap is Anthony Leal against Trey Galloway. So there's 6 games. The first 2 are probably the least intriguing from an IU recruiting perspective: Southport versus Greensburg and Brownsburg versus Heritage Hills. But once about 3:20 hits, you'll have Jalen Washington on the court, and then you'll have, some 5 stars, Christian Lander, and then obviously Trey Kaufman and Caleb First. Those guys are all, I think, worth watching. Well worth the price of admission. I've never actually been to the Forum Tipoff Classic because I feel like IU's had a game pretty much every time that it's gone on. So I think we've always kind of sent one of the students to go. This year there's no IU game that day, so it's a good chance to get out and watch a lot of great players under one roof, and that's a cool venue. Jerod, I don't know if you've ever been there before, but just one of the better gyms in the state of Indiana. A really cool place to watch a game. You kind of walk in, and I think the stadium's kind of below.
I love those kind of gyms.
Where you walk in, it's just a really good place. I think the Indiana All-Stars are actually going to be playing there the next 2 years in the summer for that series, because there's going to be some renovations at Bankers Life Fieldhouse, and that's not going to be available. So they're going to move the games there for the next 2 summers. I believe Kyle Neddenrip had something in the Star about that recently. So it's a cool place to go, and Brian Snow's, that's his event that he started up several years ago, and he's, I think, done a really good job with it, growing it and making it better every year. And this year's no exception.
Speaking of recruiting, also from Lee Can, if we get Dawson Garcia, do you think he is a one and done 2 or 3 year player for us? If people haven't seen, Dawson Garcia announced, I think this via Tipton Edits, that he'll be announcing on the 20th, has it down to an official Final Four of Indiana, Marquette, Minnesota, and Memphis. I don't know anybody who thinks that Memphis and Minnesota have a real chance, so it seems like it's down between Indiana and Marquette. So we will see. In terms of if he's a one and done 2 or 3 year player, I'm sure his goal would be to be a one and done. He's ranked right around like between 25 and 30, 35-ish. So he probably projects more as a guy who would need at least 2 years. But, from a skill perspective, at least to compare him to someone that Indiana fans know now in Trace Jackson Davis because they're ranked in somewhat similar spots. He would probably have a game that's more likely to go one and done than Trace just because he can face the basket and he can shoot and has a little bit more versatility. I don't think anybody is projecting Trace as a one and done, even as impactful as he's been so far. So, like, if I was a betting man, I would say 2 years. Maybe if he comes in and shoots the lights out, he could go one. But you don't often see the guys that are down there around the 30s as kind of the slam dunk one and done types.
Yeah, and the other thing is, I mean, he's intriguing because of his size and his ability to shoot from the perimeter, but the only really the elite big men are leaving college after 1 year. I mean, there's just not as the same market as there was before in the NBA for bigs. So yeah, I haven't talked to anybody that has mentioned that he would be a guy that's a one and done. I just, there's examples every year of a guy that's ranked, outside of that 5-star range ending up being a one and done, but it's hard to project that. So I would say 2 or 3 year player would be the more reasonable expectation going in. And we'll see. I mean, I think it'd be interesting if he does come to Indiana to see how he and Trace can play together, because I feel like that's a combo that could play off of each other pretty well. I
mean, if he does come, you start looking at that front court for next year with he and Trace and Justin and Jerome and Race. I mean, there's some talent and some options down there. Yeah, and Brunk too. I mean, that's imposing. So I look forward to Archie trying to figure out how to mix and match the playing time with all those guys.
Right.
Let's see. Last question. This is from Will Take Charge. How did you celebrate the Evansville win over Kentucky?
I didn't celebrate it. I had it on. It was funny. There were some fans that were sitting right next to me. I had it on in press row because the game I was watching there was a foul every 13 seconds, and so I pulled up YouTube TV on my laptop and started watching that game. Which I think they both started at were they both 7:00 tips, or was Indiana?
I don't know.
Later. But I know that game ended a lot earlier than Indiana. That game ended a lot earlier than Indiana's game. But it's living in Louisville. You hear there was a lot of the sports talk radio the next morning. There was a lot of hot takes on Kentucky, and is this doom and gloom for them? I mean, realistically, this is probably the best thing that could happen for John Calipari, because in a few weeks people have forgotten about this. I mean, they'll still talk about it, obviously, but he's going to get the attention of his team, and I think they're going to end up growing from this, and they're still going to be the one thing I will say, I think it kind of speaks to the parity in college basketball this year. There's not going to be one dominant team, but I mean, Kentucky did just beat Michigan State. Let's not forget about that. I mean, they had a horrible performance against Evansville, but ultimately they're still going to be a team that ends up as a top 2 or 3 seed in the NCAA tournament.
I don't buy the notion that it's like the best thing that could happen. I think the best thing,
not the best thing, but I don't think Calipari is like, oh my gosh, the season's over. He's gonna use it as motivation for these guys.
But I think you could have gotten that motivation with a close shave. Losing, I think, losing, number one, it puts a bad loss on your resume, and it's like anything else, you get into habits. And I think, now you've been in a close game and you've lost like that, just takes away a little bit of maybe the confidence that they built by getting that big win over in the Champions Classic. So I understand the point behind saying it's the best thing, and I think he'll get a lot out of it. And I think a poor performance by a talented team, young team, can be helpful for a coach. But I just don't buy that actually losing, that you need to actually lose the game to get all of that. Because I think there's bad stuff that comes with losing.
Do you get the same attention from your team from winning a game by 1 or 2 when you don't show up at all? Or do you actually have to go through I feel like everything that Calipari does is mental gymnastics, because he's every year his situation's different. And I just think it's kind of foolish at this point to just bury Kentucky and say they're not going to reach their potential because they lost to Evansville in early November. I mean, it
doesn't change the outlook for Kentucky.
It's fun to troll their fans and all that stuff on social media. It's fun to celebrate Evansville. It's a cool thing for Evansville. I mean, nobody gives them a chance, right? I mean, they go into a place that no unranked non-conference teams ever come in there and win. They get a win, but I mean, I think it's something it might be the best resume win in college basketball this season for any team. I mean, going there to win, but
I know.
We'll see. I mean,
and it's cool that it was Walter McCarty that did it too. That was neat. I will say this, the only quote unquote celebrate. I did not celebrate, Kentucky losing a game like this to a team like Evansville, because Indiana, in its own recent history, has had Indiana State come in and Fort Wayne come in to our home gym.
Fort Wayne, they've lost to Fort Wayne twice.
Beat us. Yeah. So I was not celebrating that part of it. The only thing I did to celebrate this particular game was like and retweet some very clever tweets about how John Calipari now is not going to schedule any more games with Evansville. That was funny, and that line of humor I appreciated. So I did celebrate that, but, otherwise, it is fun to kind of point and laugh, when Kentucky loses a game, but the cold, dark, hard reality is, their program is 3 or 4 notches above ours right now, so the pointing and laughing shows, again, maybe fun for the moment, but I'm not going to do too much of it because, we got to get our house in order before we're pointing too many fingers. So
get through the month of November unscathed before you do any celebrating, because, the minute I think this team lets its guard down, we could have an interesting situation unfold in Assembly Hall. So Indiana's first and foremost has to take care of business the rest of this month, and then because they lose one of these next 4 games, and they're really in a precarious situation entering December. So.
Yeah, that can't happen. The tone's going to change quickly if that happens. That is for sure. All right, I think that's all the questions. Any other final thoughts from you, Alex, before we head into the weekend and a non-exciting but still important and interesting game against Troy coming up to see how the team responds and how they play?
Yeah, nothing. No big overarching themes going into the weekend. I did my best attempt at breaking down Troy this morning, and got a few will this be the good Troy or the bad Troy comments on Facebook. So good to see that joke is still running strong with the IU fan base. But, I'm just kind of getting through the days and the weeks here, and I can't wait to see what happens next month.
Troy shooting a whopping 43.3% from the free throw line so far on the young season. You think we've seen some bad free throws?
Hopefully there's not 87 free throws, or I'm exaggerating, but the other night was just painfully brutal. The thing that bothered me about that is there's no consistency on how these games are being called, right? It's like one crew is taking whatever mandate that the head of officiating gives them and using it to a T, and then the other ones are just not calling everything. I'm sure we'll get into Big Ten play where guys are just getting hammered on drives to the basket and there's no calls. So this is a yearly thing. And the flopping thing, don't even get me started on that. Anytime somebody falls down, it's a flopping warning now. So, I mean, my whole thing the other night, I think I tweeted, I was like, how about the officials just get in proper position to see if it was a flop or not, rather than this whole, if somebody flops, and just don't reward them. It's not speeding up the game by stopping the game to warn somebody for flopping. I mean, just don't call it if it's a flop, right? I mean, that's how it's always been. Guys, there's always been guys around the basket, somebody kind of tries to get position and the guy just falls down and somebody scores a layup and you just don't call anything. Just play on.
I agree. All right, we'll be back next week with a brand new episode of Podcast on the Brink. Make sure that after the IU Troy game, you check out InsideTheHall.com for all the post-game coverage, the minute after, 5 takeaways, all the stuff that you guys have, film session that Ryan puts out after that. And, of course, we'll have the post-game show over at assemblycall.com. And hopefully we have a couple more victories to talk about next week, and we'll be back here probably with a guest. We'll bring someone on next week, get their perspective on Indiana's start to the season. And, talk to you then. Have a good weekend, everybody. And go Hoosiers. Beat Penn State.